Welcome to Cyber Shorts, a LinkedIn Live series brought to you by Secureworks, where we talk short, snappy conversations around cybersecurity. Today with me is Alex Rose, our Director of Threat Research, and she also leads our government partnerships for Secureworks, and myself, Stacy Ladwinger, the Vice President of Marketing. Today, I'm really excited to have Alex on our show as she's going to discuss a series of sanctions by the US and United Kingdom governments against Chinese cyber threat actors. And this is a really timely conversation as governments have really ramped up their disclosures around Chinese state-sponsored cyber espionage over the past few months. So with that, Alex, let's go ahead and jump in. And why don't you talk to us about what's been announced and why is it so significant?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here today with you, Stacy. This is really a continuation of the policy to call out aggressive offensive cyber activity from China's intel services or state-affiliated threat actors. Both the US and the UK governments have announced sanctions, as you mentioned, on those two individuals, and also on what appears to be a front company that works for or on behalf of China's civilian intelligence organization known as the MSS, or the Ministry of State Security. Think about this as something like the combination of FBI and CIA, right? Quite the mission. We call this particular group Bronze Vinewood, and you'll also have heard them referred to as APT 31 by many organizations. This company and these people have served as a cover for over a decade's worth of malicious cyber operations that Chinese government has been carrying out, focusing on a range of issues or objectives over those years. It's also impacted a variety of sectors throughout that time. Think about it as any business or government mission. Leadership changes, political changes, you're going to have an evolution of the mission. That's something we'd expect. But we've seen impact to politicians around the world, foreign policy experts in more recent, instances. We also see, defense contractors, IT organizations, telecommunications, manufacturing, finance, research. To be honest, that list goes on. Additionally, along with the sanction activity, 5 others were indicted here in the United States by the Justice Department based on their alleged involvement. So one little snippet I'll add is that I haven't been able to completely dig into this, but I know we've seen overnight and into today other countries calling out this type of behavior. So I've seen reporting from Finland, New Zealand, and that's just to name a couple. And to follow up, kind of to talk about the importance of that, I think it matters calling out this behavior and this activity because it violates international norms, right? This activity is straying beyond what we've kind of tacitly agreed to are the boundaries of traditional cyber espionage around the world, which all countries do engage on, but this goes beyond it. And in the case of China, they're using it as a tool of repression, particularly when it's done by stealing private communications between individuals, the acquisition of bulk data sets and intellectual property theft, all of which can be used for a variety of purposes.
So I think, Alex, it's interesting what you just said, right? This has been going on for a decade with Chinese state-sponsored actors. Espionage at some level goes across governments. But what really is these Chinese state-sponsored threat groups doing that's different, and how have their tactics really evolved that it's gotten this notoriety and disclosures from governments around the world, as you just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not new. The activity at hand, I think the steps that they're taking, they're going further than what we would expect and what we want. And so we've seen with this example a handful of indictments and sanctions and calling out this activity. But to be honest, we don't only know about this because we've read these indictments. Here at Secureworks, in our threat research team, our incident response folks, we've been working on this particular threat actor, understanding what they do for the better part of a decade. We've watched how they've impacted organizations and helped organizations to respond to it. And as I mentioned before, like any organization, their mission evolves. If you look back to 2015, that was another point in time when we really saw the activities going outside of those boundaries. US leadership and others around the world called out that intellectual property theft that was happening and all of the cyber intrusions that were focused on the economic impact. The current objectives also need to be called out. If I may, you think about this year, I think it's a year where we have over 70 elections around the world, like major elections, right? You're talking official heads of state. people going to the polls, to include here in the US and the UK. And so we have to call out these kinds of foreign agencies who are looking to intrude and influence on our democratic processes. It's of great concern and something we don't want happening.
And let's just pull on that thread a bit more when you talk about a great concern. You just hit on some of intellectual property, potentially coming after some of the elections and, really creating doubt in a process that many around the globe take quite seriously. What other types of concerns should we be thinking about based on these activities of these Chinese state-sponsored threat actors?
Yeah, this is just one of, multiple lines of effort. We track, I think it's 36 different distinct Chinese threat groups today, active threat groups, and they have varying missions. I think we need to come back to the fact that I said China is the biggest user of offensive cyber capabilities to collect intelligence, steal IP, intellectual property, right? Acquire bulk data sets, which they will then use for a variety of purposes. Thinking everything from their intelligence, approach to training future AI models for other commercial or government purposes, right? I think the other thing we have to think about is the Chinese government is known to have an extensive strategic vision. It's not just about today, but for the next 100 years. We see the specific objectives they're focused on today. You have critical infrastructure disruption. You have the information revealed in these indictments, but we can't completely predict where they're going to go in the years to come. Not only what are they taking from us and our businesses that will impact us today, impact the collective, but also what information do they have on our children and our future businesses? Where is that going to go? And we really need to be thinking about that.
I think this is a really important point that you're making, because I think sometimes, especially anyone that's listening that's part of a democratic nation, you think about every so years, a new politician comes in, agenda changes, there's a lot of movement that happens. What you're saying, kind of in a more, in China and others that have the less democracy, their governments are planning for 100 years out. So if you're a business, you might think, what do they need for me today? Do I have any relevant data? But if you start thinking, do I have any relevant data that's going to train AI models that's going to help them a decade from now? Your answer might be different. I think that's what you're trying to call out, correct?
Yeah, completely. I think, the impact isn't always about the individual case. It's not about my business or your business. It is about the collective impact. There are also the geopolitical concerns here as well. In countries like you alluded to, we have democratic processes, leadership changes continuously. They don't have the same concerns. They can do that, go beyond the next 4 or 8 years, right? And I alluded to this, but the 100-year vision. And if we take a step back and not just focusing on APT 31 or bronze Vinewood, we're seeing targeting of less traditional targets. So if you have in your head, I know what traditional looks like, you've got to think a bit differently here. We've seen coming from the FBI, alarm bells ring in the last few months about pre-positioning in an effort to cause real world harm and destruction. We also have to remember in a time of geopolitical concerns, at times others are thinking about how do I cause my opponent to look inward, right? You always want someone looking inward because then they're not focused on you. So how do they do that? What are ways they could potentially disrupt our daily life? I think that most businesses would find that if disrupted, they impact life in a variety of ways. It's not just about the secrets that could help the defense of another nation. It is about, if my children can't go to school for a day or a week, it gets a little difficult. Here I am crossing my fingers, my kid on spring break doesn't run in, right? But if you have that day in and day out, it really matters, and we have to think about that broader context.
So I think let's bring this down to those leaders of these organizations and businesses, right? I think the first defense is always awareness, something we talk about, but what do they need to really be aware of, and how are they going to protect themselves from not only the threat that's coming from China, but potentially other state-sponsored threats that are happening across the globe?
Yeah, and I think I'd even, branch out from there, because in many cases, protecting against this does come back to the basics. Having perimeters that are patched, making sure your users are aware of phishing tactics that are used, right? Not just the email, but phone calls, texts, whatever it might be, QR codes. There's a lot of overlap in tactics from these sophisticated state-sponsored actors and the money-making criminals. You want to make sure you have a comprehensive monitoring system deployed across the enterprise so you can not only respond, but you got to be able to detect those early indications of an intrusion. And you want to practice incident response plans. So in the case that something happens, you know what you're going to do. And the other thing I would say here, intent does matter. I'll call out, we have a threat profile page. I think we were going to drop a link to that into our chats here. We can make sure we do that. These threat profiles talk about the threat actors, talk about their intent, what they might be going after. You need to know whose whiteboard are you on, whose target list are you on. When it comes to these state-sponsored groups, you're not going to get erased from that board tomorrow just because you kicked them out today. It is a persistent thing. Criminals, they want to get in, make a dollar and move on, right? There might be opportunity that comes back up, but you yourself are not the persistent threat. And in terms of state-sponsored, it is targeted. They're going after you.
Well, Alex, I want to thank you for your time today and sharing these insights. And for anyone that is tuning in, if you have concerns about, is your organization potentially at risk, potentially you hit an incident, please check out Secureworks.com. We have a full incident response team that can not only help you should something occur, we can also help you with your readiness as well. So with that, Alex, thank you. And thanks for all that joined us live today.